In this module, we will be talking about the different components of a film soundtrack and how they contribute to the greater art of filmmaking. Now, in the days of silent cinema, the film screenings were rarely silent. There was a soft piano or probably a string quartet playing in the background, and the music was largely spontaneous, sometimes pre-composed, but it was different from screening to screening, and of course different from city to city because the musicians were different. Now, when the sound first came to films, it was a very revolutionary phenomenon, of course. And the films of the time were largely dialogue-centric. The objective of the sound was just to convey the words which were printed on the screen. These were spoken by the characters themselves. As with any new technology, it was largely immature. And it took some time for this maturity to develop. With time, however, the application of sound within the film matured substantially and began to support the greater art of filmmaking. So, at the broadest level, we can categorize the soundtrack of a film into two basic categories, diegetic and non-diegetic. Now, the question arises, what does diegetic mean? Diegetic or diegesis relates to the location, the surroundings of the environment in which the scene is being portrayed. So diegetic sound would have everything to do with the location itself. If it was an outdoor shot of an outdoor scene of a children's park, then the children's screaming sounds, maybe some parents conversing in the background, distant city traffic. We wouldn't have very close city traffic near the park, but then maybe an airplane sound. These would all be part of the diegetic sound. They have a direct relationship with the location itself. On the other hand, non-diegetic sound, say background music, or if it was a commercial film, maybe a song. These are non-diegetic sound, meaning they don't have a direct relationship with the location, and they are only for mood enhancement, to increase the emotional sensitivity of the scene. Now, within diegetic sound, we have again three subcategories: dialogues, synchronous effects, or what we call sync sounds, and non-sync sounds, what we can call ambience. Now, within diegetic sound, the dialogues are usually given the greatest importance within the film. Naturally so. This is just a logical extension of our everyday life. When we are speaking to a person, other sounds, I mean, whether he's snapping his fingers or he's scratching his cheek, these, if they convey any sounds at all, these are largely unimportant. In the sense of them in conveying meaning, these sounds, they don't convey much meaning, whereas the dialogues, they give the most meaning, and we place the greatest stress on that. So the application of that in the film soundtrack is an extension of that. Now, a good sound designer understands this importance of dialogue in our everyday life and incorporates this phenomenon into the soundtrack of a film. How? Now, suppose this microphone is recording my voice. At the same time, if I snap my fingers like that or knock on the table, the sound will come it will be recorded much more loudly than the human mind actually perceives it. For example, if someone is singing and clapping their hands like that. Okay, so the clapping of the hands, that is sort of mentally filtered out, or filtered down at least, by the human mind. So we concentrate more on the words of the song and we perceive it that way. So if that is not done in the film soundtrack, it will not seem natural to us. So what this means for the sound recordist in a film is that the dialogues should be recorded at the time of shooting as clearly as possible without any kind of or as little of extraneous sounds as possible. So if, for example, someone was holding a teacup and putting it down, it makes a clank sound. So that sound should be dampened as much as possible during the film shooting. How? We can put a soft little pad over here so that putting the cup down does not create a sound. Now, these sounds can be added in post-production in the studio. So what that means for the sound recordist is that he has the dialogues recorded as clearly as possible, and that makes the sound editing job, the sound post-production job, much more easy. Now, the reason for recording the dialogues as clearly as possible during the shoot is that we need as much separation from the dialogues to the other extraneous sounds of the scene, thereby making the editing much more flexible. For example, if you're having a conversation between two people in a city park, and just at that time, in the middle of a particular shot, a fire truck goes by, and if you want to cut the shot in between a dialogue, then the sound of the fire truck will merge onto the dialogues and you will not be able to edit it properly. So if you had the dialogues as clearly as possible, even you could add the fire truck later in post-production if you find it aesthetically pleasing. But it should be an option which is left to the sound designer. So during the time of shooting, record the dialogues as clearly as possible without any kind of, or as little as extraneous sounds as possible. Whereas the human mind places less importance on the synchronous sounds, clapping of hands or snapping of fingers, we actually place more importance than we think on the non-synchronous sounds or the ambience of a room, of a location. How? Just imagine yourself in your home and you are speaking to yourself. You just imagine you have your eyes closed. You could roughly tell where you are within your home just by the way you hear yourself. For example, the sound of your voice will sound different if you are in the bathroom, or if you are in the kitchen, or if you are in your bedroom. So the ambience, the room tone, the general atmosphere of the acoustic atmosphere of the room itself, these will sound different from location to location, definitely from room to room. Now, these are actually very important clues to a soundtrack. Meaning that if we have a scene in a large cafeteria, and if the atmosphere, the ambience of the scene is something like a small classroom, it won't sound believable. The viewers will be able to tell that something is wrong. So the atmosphere, the ambience of the location is actually very, very important, although often we don't really consciously believe it so, because we don't really consciously perceive this in real life. Now let us watch this clip from the film Kramer versus Kramer. We will see how the different components of the film soundtrack, as we've discussed just now, how these have been incorporated in this short scene from the film. Now, if we analyze this soundtrack very carefully, we'll find that it's a simple scene. Ted Kramer, he's having lunch with his boss. They are having a casual conversation, and gradually it turns serious. Now, if this were to happen to us in real life, how would our perception of sound change? When we are having this casual conversation with anybody, we look all around us. We take in everything that we hear, what we see. We pay attention to just about everything. But as the conversation becomes more focused, the boss is talking about his job and everything. So Ted Kramer, we are looking at watching the film from Ted Kramer's perspective. So as his attention becomes more focused towards his boss's words, towards the conversation, the soundtrack is also reflecting that. You will immediately notice when the boss first approaches the topic of Ted Kramer's job, all of a sudden the soundtrack, the ambient sounds, sync sounds, everything except the boss's dialogues, they become much more suppressed. So this is just a reflection on our human perception. So as we have seen, sync effects should be used very carefully and very subtly because they have a tendency of being overused. And remember that sync effects are something which in normal course the human mind tends to ignore or probably take for granted. Now, we're about to watch another scene from Kramer versus Kramer where sync effects have been used differently. It's a scene where Mr. Kramer, Ted Kramer, is meeting his soon-to-be ex-wife in a bar after about 15 months. It's their first conversation after their separation. So let's watch As we have seen in this clip, the sync effects have been slightly exaggerated to create a sort of inherent tension within the scene. Mr. Kramer is meeting his soon-to-be ex-wife. They are both very apprehensive about what's to come. Mrs. Kramer because she's going to ask custody for the son, and Ted Kramer because he has no idea about what's to happen. So this inherent tension is expressed in the soundtrack by the sound designer by exaggerating the sync effects a little bit more than we are normally accustomed to, especially in the end where Ted Kramer throws the glass against the wall. That sound, it's supposed to be a larger-than-life experience. So now let's talk about the role of non-diegetic sound in the soundtrack of a film. Now, non-diegetic sound mainly comprises background music. So background music is mainly used to enhance the emotional impact of a scene, similar to how we use boldface or underline in written text. This has been used very effectively by many music directors and film directors in their films. Notable of which is the film Pather Panchali, of course by Satyajit Ray. Let's watch two clips from that film. Both are just after Durga dies. The first one is immediately after Durga dies. The morning afterwards, Oppu is bringing their next door neighbor to his mother to find out what has happened. And especially over here, note the use of silence as a dramatic effect.
অপু, তুমি তোমার জ্যাঠামশাইকে একবার খবর দাও তো বাবা। বলো যে জেঠিমা ডাকছেন। দিদি ঘুমোচ্ছে? হ্যাঁ, যাও তো বাবা, যাও, লক্ষ্মী ছেলে।
We have seen in this clip, the background music enhances the feeling of loneliness that we feel for Oppu and the absence of Durga from his life. Now let us watch another clip from Pother Pachali. Here, Harihar is returning home after several months and is about to hear the news of the death of his daughter. Here we will find that the background music ultimately replaces the dialogue.
খোকা দুর্গা ও তুমি আছো
এসো।
কেমন আছো এরা সব বেরিয়েছে বুঝি ও কি যাচ্ছ কোথায় জিনিসগুলো এনেছি দেখো আগে আসতে পারলে কি আর আসতেও না রানাঘাটে এসে কপাল ফিরে গেছে বুঝলে আর দিনকার ঘোরাঘুরি সার্থক হয়েছে তাই দেখো চড়কের মেলার থেকে দেখো কারোর কাঠের জিনিস আর লক্ষ্মীর পট আনতে বলেছিলে এই দেখো কেমন কাঁচ দিয়ে বাঁধিয়ে এনেছি আর এই দেখো দুর্গার জন্য একখান এই দেখো না
So isn't it just amazing how the Tarshanai has been used so effectively here? If it was any other film director, then they would have kept Harihar's crying, the sorrow, then his wife's crying along with them. It would have been a really melodramatic thing and the end of story. But here, the Tarshanai is telling their story, their crying, their sorrow, in a totally different way and definitely much more effective. So here the background music is taking over the role of the dialogue, and it doesn't really remain background anymore. That music itself is telling a story that is becoming the dialogue, that is becoming everything, that is becoming the soundtrack, and it's attaining a new entity by itself. So, as we have seen, the role of sound in cinema has certainly evolved and matured dramatically since the days of the silent films. But one should always keep in mind that the role of the sound recordist and the soundtrack within the film is a subsidiary of the film itself. It should never take on an identity of its own. From a more technical point of view, the operations, the manipulations that the sound designer creates on the sound track, say from the film Kramer versus Kramer, where Mr. Kramer is having lunch with his boss, and the dramatic use of the sync effects, where the conversation is casual to where it becomes more serious, the diminishing of the level of the sync effects. If this manipulation was discernible to the audience, then the sound designer has failed in his job. we must remember that the ideal sound recordist is one who is able to keep his job transparent and keep a very low profile.